is countdown of dead air. And let me do that. Okay. Counting down 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. They're going to have a very interesting matchup as they head into this weekend's playoff games. And of course, I am Earl Holland after a long hiatus, and I am back here for another Sports Refuge podcast live stream. We're here to talk with fans of the teams in the NFL playoff mix. Of course, all 14 teams will be represented here. And here to talk about the Miami Dolphins is longtime Dolphins fan. A lot of you got him, and we'll be having him on in a full length episode where we talk about what's been new and going on his neck of the woods. But everybody knows him, and everybody say hi to Brandon Berns. Brandon, how are you this evening?
Can't complain, Earl. Thanks for having me back to talk about my Miami Dolphins that are playoff bound for the first time in years.
You know, it's very interesting when you think about it, how close they were in the past couple of years, getting close with Coach Flores, and then the change in coaching staff to going to the new, Coach McDonald. And I was wondering, before we get into that whole thing, this has to be a very interesting sequence, especially the ownership situation where he was suspended for a bit about that, and he did, yeah, I think that's the new thing when it comes to NFL problems. You're going to get suspended by the commissioner, even if it isn't as bad as a certain person up in Washington is doing.
Yeah, it's always interesting with this team, and especially as you talk about ownership there, it kind of just seems there's always an underlying story coming out, or something that you think hey, we're positioned in the draft, and then you hear stories about them trying to get Brady years and years and years ago, and now we get penalized as we look at the 23 draft. But I'm happy that we have McDaniel and as our coach, and hopefully if Tua can stay on the field, it's one of those things. I think it's as we were kind of talking there offline, it's two different teams when you have Tua on the field and Tua not on the field. So
we'll give a few teams that is exactly the same story, with maybe some teams who can function without their quarterback, and then you can always see how different all. I wanted to get into our discussion. Just ask you, how did you become a Miami Dolphins fan?
Well, I think for me, it was kind of instilled in me from birth. My dad was a Miami Dolphins fan as well. So he was born there in the 60s. So when he was growing up, was right in the prime time years for the Dolphins when they had Greasy, Zonka, Kick, the 72, 73 teams, the undefeated team. That was right when he was growing up. So for me, I just kind of, I was born in there in the mid 80s. That's right when they had, drafted Dan Marino. And, when I was first born, they did get to that Super Bowl. And then, from from there on out, it was, the best quarterback in the NFL, arguably at that time, set all the records for yardage, and they had Shule, the winningest coach. So, for me, being from Eastern Pennsylvania, I was kind of always going against the grain when we looked at all the sports teams, not only being a Dolphins fan, but also being a Mets fan as well on the baseball side. So it was kind of the, hey, I'm the outlier to all my friends who were Eagles and Phillies fans as well. So,
In your mind, what is the biggest Dolphins moment? Excluding all the love they got on Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
well, I think for me, the play that I remember is obviously, the spike against the Jets. I would say, when I was growing up, that was, the big play, especially with Marino, kind of growing up and, always seeing those battles with Kelly in the playoffs and, having those, different opportunities to where, hey, he was setting all the records. And then, more recently, you think back to that Patriots play, when, Gronkowski couldn't tackle Drake going into the end zone in the Miami Miracle. But then I also, always remember back to, the Leon Lett play. I remember that I was at my grandmother's, in Danville, Pennsylvania, and, seeing, Leon Lett kick the ball and Stojakovic then, kicking that field goal through on Thanksgiving when it, was icing in Dallas that day.
What were your expectations coming into the season for the Dolphins? I'm assuming, well, you said the transition Flores to McDaniel was going to be an important one as Flores got pretty close and was on the outside looking in last year. Now, new coach and pretty much the same roster with the one big addition, Tyreek Hill. What were your expectations for this team?
I think, just seeing what they did in free agency and especially around the draft, bringing in, obviously, Hill was a big piece. Pretty solid defense coming back from last year, and that they kept the defensive coordinator. I thought, for the most part, that second half of last year, the defense kept us in a lot of games. So, really, if we were able to get that offensive coach, keep the, perspective and, really have somebody that was in Tua's, good graces and really kind of, look to really promote him and, his talents that he did have. And then, to really see, hey, we went out and got Mostert, in free agency. We went out and got left tackle in Armstead. We, signed a new center. The offensive line was the biggest thing that really let us down a lot of times, as we kind of looked at last year as well. So, bringing in those two pieces and, having Hill as well, was a huge, huge piece. And then, so I think, my expectations, going into the season, all really, resided on Tua because, if he was able to, perform, which, he did early on in the season, you saw with that team, that offense ran, they were clicking, they were scoring points, and, they were off and running in the early part of the season when Tua was healthy.
Uh, what was there a point in the season you were definitely confident that the Dolphins are getting into the playoffs?
I think after that Sunday night game when we beat the Steelers, I believe we were right around 8-3, leading the division. I think we were number one in the playoffs. I think at that point there was no really way that we could have screwed that up to say, hey, we aren't going to make the playoffs. As we see with this team, we win 3, we lose 3, we win 5, we lose 5. So I think streaky is to the nth degree the name of the game, but I think that also goes back to a lot of the just issues we've had health wise. I think with a lot of the players, Two is the main one that everybody will kind of see as we kind of look through the season. But Armstead, I think in the last couple of games, I think he's had 4 or 5 different ailments. As he's been listed on the injury report. I know Hill has kind of had an ankle, Waddle's had an ankle here and there. I know Mostert just broke his thumb, most recently. So it's kind of one of those things where, hey, can we get the full team and the full allotment? Because even on the defensive side, I don't think Byron Jones has really played with, this season. He was a big free agent acquisition a couple of years ago at cornerback. And so, really kind of just looking through those pieces to where, we haven't really, had those, full complement of, hey, everybody's healthy to see what the team can fully do outside of maybe a 1 or 2 game stretch that we had mid-season.
What was the point that led you to be concerned about them not making the playoffs? Just a Tua injury? Was it other issues about consistency?
I think, as we kind of looked at the season, I know especially here, um, more recently, obviously the Buffalo game was a big game. They played really well with Buffalo. That could have been a coin flip either way. I think that the defense really let us down. But I think, for me, really kind of looking at the Green Bay game, I think was my kind of concerning point to say, hey, we had the Patriots yet, we had the Jets yet. Is it that fact of, hey, we got to win 1 out of 3? Knowing that, the gauntlet we had to go through with San Francisco, with, the Chargers, getting through Buffalo again, that's going to be a tough stretch. All those guys are playoff teams, but then, seeing, hey, can we win those games that we needed to win, i.e., beating the Packers, beating the Pats, we, handled the Pats in the season opener, kind of looked a lot different, but then, as we saw then as well, with Tua getting hurt, Teddy Bridgewater for the 2 games that he kind of played, I don't think he finished either of those games as well. And then, being down to a rookie third stringer then in Skylar Thompson, who, last Sunday didn't really light the world on fire, versus the Jets, as we saw with the final score and, field goals and a safety. So,
Who do you think, even though the brackets are already out, the Dolphins match up the best with in the AFC playoff bracket?
I think, kind of seeing that Miami's played a majority of the teams. I mean, we've, had that miraculous comeback versus Baltimore, early on in the season. We split with Buffalo. I think we played, pretty poorly at the Chargers on when we had them on Sunday night. So, kind of looking at it, I think it's very, very tough, as we saw in NFL history, to, play a team 3 times. So I think, if we were going to have that first round matchup, as much as I don't want to see, Josh Allen across the way. But I think, Buffalo might be that matchup to say, hey, we have history with them. We know their personnel inside and out. And, I think if you're gonna, go through everybody, you gotta start and beat everybody anyway. So let's start with Buffalo and go that route. So
Who's the team that scares you the most as a Dolphins fan in the AFC?
I think Cincinnati, just from their offensive perspective with Burrow and with Chase and Boyd and Higgins, and having Mixon as well. I think offensively, they're probably the scariest team out there, just the way they've been playing, and really, watching how they've been throwing the deep ball. I think Cincinnati is going to give everybody problems this postseason.
At the were you expecting really the 40ers have played when you hired him? Was he your choice as the coach to replace Coach Flores?
For the the rumors that kind of are out there, obviously I thought Ross was going to go with the big hire and try to go after Harbaugh again. You heard the things going back and forth with trying to get Peyton from the Saints. But I think for the offensive perspective and kind of the personnel that we have, I think his offense has definitely ran the correct way. I mean, I think for the most part, he's very, very blunt as well to kind of say, hey, this is what's working, this is what's not working, which is refreshing when you kind of look at that coaching perspective. And I think, for the most part, the guys really, attach themselves to him. Everything that you read, that you don't really see many players saying anything bad about him. So, from that side of things, obviously a first year head coach, but I've been impressed with what he's done so far.
Full prediction. Who do you have coming out of the NFC? What's the final score and who?
Yeah, so I think ultimately, I'd love to see the Dolphins get there. I think being the 7th seed, it's going to be a very, very hard road to get through a potential run of Buffalo, Kansas City, and probably Cincinnati. But realistically looking at it, I think Miami might be about a year away. Get everybody healthy, and depending on I think really who's our quarterback going into it. Is Tua allowed to come back and play? Are we looking at potentially Skylar Thompson playing? Realistically, though, I'm probably thinking it's probably going to be a Cincinnati versus Philadelphia Super Bowl. And I will go back just to have my friends in Eastern Pennsylvania be able to celebrate and see the chaos that might happen in Philly again with those greasing up the poles. But I think we're going to have an Eagles Super Bowl win, probably 35-31 in the Super Bowl, and have a big shootout.
Before we wrap this up, any shout outs you want to give? Any way you want people to let people can find out to? Oh, and is there a way people can reach out to you to discuss things and talk Dolphins football?
Oh yeah, obviously on Twitter at Brandon Berns. From that perspective, big things coming up. Obviously, I'm back in Division II athletics now with my alma mater in Slippery Rock. So, big things coming there. Hopefully next season for the Rock there in the football aspect. Our basketball team's off to a great start. So hopefully we'll be able to keep that rolling here through the rest of the season then as well. And biggest thing for me, as the next couple of months approach, obviously with the NFL playoffs going on, but I'll actually be getting married in about 2 months here as well, so we're in final prep mode for that big day from that perspective. So we'll be taking the final plunge there on that perspective. But from that side, love joining you today, Earl, and obviously from that perspective, would love to hear what everybody else has to say about their teams, and hopefully you and I are talking about a Dolphins Super Bowl victory come mid-February then. So
Definitely, Brandon. I appreciate it. And for everybody who's watching, this is the first of a string of live streams. Coming up next in about 20 some odd minutes will be Quincy Peaker talking about the Dallas Cowboys. After that, we'll have Dave Hudson talking about the Seattle Seahawks. And following that, to wrap up tonight's live streams, we'll have Jeffrey McCoy talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. And again, for my guest, Brandon Berns, I am Earl Holland saying thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you back in a little bit.